You're listening to Radio August. Dark Nights with Poe and Monroe.
Dimitri's Descent by Chris Hoppenbrouwers, read by The Raw Geek. Dimitri stared out into the pitch-black darkness outside of his bedroom window. It felt unnatural to be here, in this place, so far away from home. With some regret, he thought back to the day he volunteered for a top-secret project at an undisclosed location. When he had first heard those words, undisclosed location, he had assumed the location would be somewhere on Earth. Instead, he now found himself on the far side of the moon. Dr. Dimitri Sheffield, an expert in the field of archaeology, hadn't had a breath of fresh air in 8 months. This, combined with the moon's low gravity, a lack of sunlight, the station's depressing food pastes, and the project's mounting work pressure, had gone so far to affect his physical appearance. He had even started to avoid mirrors, in fear of catching a glimpse of himself, a pale, gaunt carcass of a man, more akin to a ghost than any living being. But the work kept him going. It had to. Dimitri kept reminding the others, and himself, that they were writing history here. Unimaginable discoveries had been made these last few months. Discoveries he had never dared dream of, much less be a part of. When he and the other scientists first arrived here, their excitement had been almost unbearable. But that initial spark of enthusiasm had faded, like a falling star in the night sky. On the morning of his 249th day on the moon, or was it night? It was hard to tell up here. Dimitri boarded the elevator to the excavation site, as he had been doing for the last 248 days. He was joined in the elevator by the other 3 members of his scientific team. Dr. Ian Remington, Dr. Hanako Yutani, and Dr. Wolfgang Whitfield were all experts in their fields, those being paleontology, linguistics, and exobiology respectively. Dimitri glanced at them and for the first time noticed their hollow cheeks and the dark circles under their eyes. It seemed the moon had taken its toll on Earth's best and brightest. As they waited for the elevator to reach the bottom, they went through their schedule for the day, which centered around their latest discovery, a hole of less than 2 meters wide that seemed to go on for several kilometers into the ground. Its edges were most unusual in that they were astonishingly smooth down to a molecular level. Indeed, it was clear that this hole was not a natural formation, but neither could it have been man-made. The hole was drilled, or otherwise created, over 50 million years ago, long before the dawn of the first man. This was one of the few things they had been able to ascertain about their mystifying discovery, and the 4 scientists knew there was much more to be done. The plan, then, was to send more probes down the hole in order to determine how much deeper it went. They had been doing this for the last 14 days, much to Dimitri's growing frustration. At this point, Dimitri started to wonder if the pit even had a bottom, and dreaded what they would find there if it did. "Is it really wise to send more probes down the hole?" Dimitri asked as they went over their plans. The 3 other scientists looked at him questioningly as they waited for him to elaborate. "All probes so far have malfunctioned at a depth of 500 meters. Are we really planning to do the same thing while expecting different results? Are you calling us insane?" asked Dr. Whitfield, pretending to be offended. "Do you have another suggestion?" Dr. Yutani offered. Without much thought, Dimitri blurted out, "We could send a person down there." Then, again without thinking, added, "One of us, perhaps?" The others eyed him with concern. "I'm not sure that's wise," said Dr. Remington, clearly echoing the thoughts of the other 2 scientists. Perhaps it was Dimitri's frustration with the project's slow progress and his eagerness for a breakthrough that prompted him to volunteer himself, much to the surprise of the others. "I will," he insisted. "I'll do it." The 3 scientists all looked at each other, silently wondering if Dimitri had gone crazy, but they were too tired, too drained to argue. Well, Dr. Whitfield conceded with a sigh, if you're really that sure about it. The others offered no protest. All right, Dr. Sheffield, you're all hooked up and ready to go. The crew member, who had helped him put on his rappelling harness, performed a final check on the crane, which was normally used for lowering the much lighter probes down the abyssal shaft. Dr. Remington had initially objected to using the feeble apparatus, but when no alternative had presented itself, Dimitri had once again insisted that he be strapped in. Dimitri took a deep breath. Let's do it then. The three other scientists standing behind the table with monitoring equipment each gave him a nod, and with that, Dimitri disappeared into the depths. Dr. Sheffield, do you read me? Dimitri was startled by the sudden voice in his ear. He'd almost forgotten about the earpiece he was wearing. Yes, Dr. Yutani, I hear you loud and clear, he replied. All right, we're going to accelerate your descent a bit, otherwise we'll be here all day. Dr. Yutani sounded tired. Besides, we don't want you down there any longer than necessary. Neither do I, thought Dimitri. Even in the moon's low gravity, he could feel his stomach drop as his descent quickly accelerated. Dr. Yutani checked in with him at regular intervals to confirm that their communication was still working, and to notify him of the depth of his descent. 200 meters, 300 meters, 400, 500, 600, 700. Nearing the end of the rope now, she informed Dimitri at 800 meters. If we lose communication, just... The rest was inaudible. I'll just tug the rope and you'll pull me back up, Dimitri said to himself. After plummeting what was probably a few hundred meters more, he jerked to a sudden halt. That's the end of the rope, Dimitri said out loud. He wasn't sure why he suddenly felt the need to narrate. He could almost convince himself that he was doing it for the recording device on his arm, or in the small hope that Dr. Yutani and the others could still hear him, but secretly he knew. He simply wished to break the unsettling silence that commanded this deep and dark void. All right, let's have some light, he said as he turned on the small lamp on his helmet. Dimitri slowly rotated on the rope to inspect all sides of the tunnel. Only now did it occur to him how narrow the tunnel really was. If he got stuck somehow, there was no way for anyone to help him out. He desperately tried to dismiss the thought and focus on his work. Not much to see here, just more smooth black surfaces and... Hold on. There's some scratches here. Did I do that just now? No, they're not scratches. It appears to be some sort of writing. Dr. Yutani, if you're hearing this, prepare to make history. You're going to have a field day with this. I'll be sure to get some pictures for you. Dimitri, fully aware that he was suspended above unknown heights, carefully produced his camera from a pouch on his belt when the lamp on his helmet suddenly went out. This is not just probes that end up malfunctioning down here. It's too dark now to take a photo, but... Dimitri reached into another pouch and carefully took out a pencil and a piece of paper. I'll make a copy of the etchings for you, Dr. Yutani. You can thank me when I come back up. He placed the piece of paper over the etchings and proceeded to rub it with the pencil. Copying all of the writing took longer than he would have liked. It wasn't easy to find some of the small markings in the pitch-black darkness, so the work was tedious and fiddly. Yet the soft scratching on the pencil had a soothing quality to it. It managed to chase away the silence and took his mind off the endless depths beneath him. By the time Dimitri was done with his task, he had gotten so used to the sound of the scratching pencil that it still lingered in his head. A welcome reprieve from the unnerving silence, he thought, until he realized two things. It wasn't in his head, and it wasn't scratching. They were whispers. Overcome by a sudden and severe dread, Dimitri frantically jerked on the rope. There was no response. As Dimitri kept tugging on the rope, the whispers grew louder, or perhaps they were getting closer. Dimitri started yelling up the shaft. Pull me up! Get me out of here, please! He swore he heard laughter coming from down below. As Dimitri's heart was beating in his chest and his stomach started to turn inside out, he tried climbing up the rope in a panic. Finally, he felt the sweet release of slowly being lifted up towards the surface. Faster! Please go faster! He pleaded the moment communication was restored. What's going on, Dr. Sheffield? Dr. Whitfield's voice was music to Dimitri's ears. I don't know, he replied. Just get me back up. Later that day, Dimitri returned to his private quarters and plumped down on the bed, exhausted. He hadn't told anyone about the whispers in the dark for fear of being mocked, or worse, being declared mentally unfit. He had already played back the audio tape from his recorder on the way back to his quarters, and was unable to discern any unusual sounds. This either meant the whispers were on a wavelength that couldn't be picked up by a microphone, or he was indeed going insane. He wasn't sure which was scarier. He had, however, showed Dr. Yutani the etchings he had copied, much to her delight and gratitude. It appeared the writing consisted of one word repeated over and over. Thanks to some earlier linguistic discoveries made at other lunar sites, Dr. Yutani was able to create a rough translation of the word, or rather something that approximated its meaning: punishment for the wicked or curious. As people of science, they had all agreed how disturbing it was that, to the civilization that came up with this word, curiosity was a concept to be closely associated with wickedness, something to be punished. As he contemplated the day's events, Dimitri quickly fell asleep. He couldn't wait to go back home. He awoke later that night, startled by the sounds of loud whispering, and switched on the light next to his bed. It wasn't working, and his eyes hadn't yet gotten used to the dark, so he instead listened intently. The whispers had stopped. All he heard now was the soft, familiar buzzing of a ceiling lamp. Dimitri wondered how the light could be on if his room was still shrouded in darkness. He rubbed the hills of his hands against his eyes, trying hopelessly to rub the blackness out of them. His befuddlement slowly turned to horror as he came to the terrifying realization that he had gone blind. Panicking, Dimitri stumbled out of bed, felt his bare feet touch the cold floor, and quickly, but carefully, made his way to the door. He searched for the handle, opened the door, and stumbled into the hallway. "Help!" he stammered. "Somebody help!" No one answered. He continued into the common area of the base, which he knew to be consistently occupied by crew members returning from their shifts. Is anyone here?" he asked, and waited. Again there was no response, but as he listened closer, he noticed another presence in the room. He could hear them breathing. "Hello? Can you hear me?" he tried again. "I can't see. I think I'm blind." The breathing became heavier, but there was no reply. Without knowing what came over him, Dimitri yelled out in frustration and fear, stomping his feet like a frustrated child. "Please help me!" The breathing suddenly stopped and changed into a deeply unsettling guttural sound. Fear slowly started to take hold of Dimitri. Just when he was about to turn around and run into the hallway, the guttural noise faded into what sounded like a dying breath. Held back by doubt, but compelled by curiosity, he approached the source of the sound. He reached out his hand, but no one was there. Dimitri was both perplexed and overcome by a frightful panic. He felt like he was going mad. Nothing made sense. He just wanted to leave this nightmare and go home. But home was a million miles away. He knew he was alone here, and no one would be coming to help him. It was then he heard the voices again whispering to him. As the murmurs grew louder, Dimitri was almost able to make out individual words in a language wholly unknown to him, or any other man. Its harsh consonants and unearthly vowels chilled him to the bone. Dimitri covered his ears to make it stop, but the nameless voices only grew more incessant, hounding him, compelling him to listen, until he understood the meanings of their words. "This is how you die." Dimitri tried to scream, but there was no sound. He reached for his throat and felt his skin peel away. "Dr. Sheffield? Come in, Dr. Sheffield!" Dimitri was suddenly startled by the voice in his earpiece. He didn't realize where he was, until he noticed he was suspended in the air. He was still inside the hole. Had he been dreaming? As he ascended the shaft, he wondered which part had been a dream and what had been reality. It all felt the same to him. He quickly searched his pouch and found the etchings he had made. Everything that had occurred after he copied the notes must have been some kind of hallucination, he concluded, possibly caused by a gas or an unfamiliar type of radiation. The three scientists all looked at him eagerly as he climbed out of the hole. "Well, did you find anything down there?" Dr. Whitfield asked. "All we heard was static." "I have something that might interest Dr. Yutani," Dimitri said with a smile, trying to hide his anxiety. With a trembling hand, he produced the etchings from his pouch. "What's this?" Dr. Yutani asked as she carefully accepted the notes. More writing from the strangers? She studied the letters, hemming and hawing. It's just one word repeated over and over. I need to cross-reference with the Daedalus findings, but at first glance it seems to be about abuse or torture. Or punishment, added Dimitri, a fearful realization in his voice. Well, yes, replied Dr. Yutani. She looked at Dimitri with bewilderment, more surprised and impressed by his linguistic knowledge. Punishment for the wicked or curious, Dimitri said, his eyes wide with fear. Dr. Remington looked at the others in confusion, then at Dimitri. How did you know? Dimitri snapped back to reality. We've had this conversation before. Is it possible you're having déjà vu? Asked Dr. Remington. No, Dimitri replied. I'm sure. I remembered what those writings meant, he said, as he frantically pointed at the notes Dr. Yutani was holding. Are you saying you've seen what exactly, the future? Dr. Whitfield asked. He sounded incredulous. Dimitri's shoulders slumped as his gaze dropped to the floor. Yes, I think so. There was a long silence, and he didn't dare guess what the others thought of him. Well, if you saw the future, what happens next? Dr. Remington asked with some trepidation. Dimitri tried to find the words. I'll go to sleep, and when I wake tomorrow, I'll be blind, and everyone else will be gone. I'm going to die here alone. The other scientists quietly glanced at each other. Dr. Yutani was the first to speak. I'm sure it won't play out like that. Her words were meant to be comforting, but lacked conviction. It was probably some kind of hallucination, said Dr. Whitfield as he placed a hand on Dimitri's shoulder. Nothing to worry about. Dimitri just stared into empty space, his eyes filled with dread. They all arrived at the living quarters about an hour later. On the way over, Dimitri had listened to his recordings and couldn't make out anything out of the ordinary. Perhaps the others were right. Perhaps it was all just in his head. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen his imminent and unavoidable future. A slow and terrifying death, surrounded by darkness, trapped in an alien place. Chills ran down his spine. He lay himself on bed and quickly fell asleep. He couldn't wait to go back home. Later that night, Dimitri awoke to the sound of cold and hollow whispers in the darkness. He didn't bother turning on the light this time.
You're listening to Radio August. Dark Nights with Poe and Monroe.
Guys, if you're still here, you're awesome! But as you are still here, why not check out some of my other videos? Oh, and if you haven't already, please click subscribe. Laters, haters.